Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for joining in today. I'm super excited to talk about localization and remix and contentful. Just to give you all a bit of a background, I'm originally from India and I moved to Germany 2 years back. Moving to a different country without knowing the language has been a tad bit challenging, and that's why for me, localization is very personal. So in this talk, I'm gonna show you how to implement localization to Remix, and also do a quick introduction about Remix. So this is what the agenda looks like. We're gonna look into localization, internationalization, Remix, and also look into how you can connect Remix with Contentful, and get started with implementing localization on your Contentful instance as well. So, quick introduction about myself. I work as a developer advocate at Contentful, and I love to experiment with different technologies. Remix has been my one of the recent experiments that I have been doing, and I have been enjoying it so far. The other experiment that I have been doing and I have been enjoying a lot is with the Web HID API. If you don't know about the Web HID API, I would say go ahead, take a look at it. It's a really fun API to connect your HID devices with your web applications and just have fun. And if you want to know more about me, you can just go on Harshil.dev, get my social handles over there, and just get connected with me. All right, so let's move forward and talk about localization. So when I talk to folks about localization first, the feedback that I got from the folks was localization is translation, which is not really true, because localization is more than translation. It's creating a product, or basically adapting your product for the local region, for the local market that you have. So it's not just about translating that content, but also making sure uh, how that content is displayed and how your whole application is displayed in that local region. So again, localization is an adaptation of your product to meet the language, cultural, and other requirements of a specific target market, and it's not just about translation. And when we talk about localization, you might often hear the term internationalization, which goes hand in hand. While localization is about adapting that product to the target market, internationalization is the process of getting over there. So internationalization is basically making sure that you design and develop the product in such a way that it enables you to implement localization. All right, so that was localization and internationalization. I gave you again a very quick overview about those things. You can learn more about it on the internet and get more detailed understanding of what those means. But because I have limited amount of time, I'm gonna move forward and talk about my now favorite framework called Remix. Uh, as Sean already mentioned, Remix is a React based meta framework, but the way Remix themselves describe is just wonderful, because for them it's a compiler, it's a server-side HTTP handler, a server framework, and a browser framework, which is interesting. So let's take a couple of minutes to understand this. So when we say that it's a compiler, it means that it compiles and gives you a server and a client. And with that, it also gives you an asset manifestation file, which maps your code correctly both on for the server and the client. And then it is also a server-side HTTP handler, which means that uh, no matter what platform you deploy your application to, because Remix uses the Web Fetch API, you can deploy it anywhere you want, and you can also have wrappers for your existing servers. And Remix also takes away so not it does not take away, but it basically works as your view and controller from the MVC framework that we have. So it gives you more control over your API calls, or you can even create APIs with just Remix. And then it is a browser framework, so it gives you client code, it manages hydration, it has optimized UI, which works fantastic when you have a lot of form submissions going in your application. All right. So let's talk about how do you set up a remix project. Well, it's quite straightforward. All you have to do is run the command npx create remix latest, and it will show up an interactive CLI for you, and you can go ahead and do that. So over here, I have a small video which will show you how that works. So again, I'm running the command npx create remix. Once it's ready, I enter the name of the project over here. I can select from like a pre-configured template or start from scratch, and then based on where I want to host this, I can select the server as well. And then if I want to do a TypeScript project or a JavaScript project, I can see that, and then install the packages. Now that packages is installed, we are good to go for the next step. All right. Now for this, because again, we have limited time, I already have set up the project. So I ran the same commands, and now I have a project that is bootstrap with Remix. And over here is the file. So I'm going to walk you through this, and I'm going to try to explain you how this looks. So by default, we have an app directory, and this is where our code lives. So in the app directory, we have routes where we are going to define various routes. As you can see, by default, there is an index route, which is again the index of your application. And then there is the entry file and the server file. Again, if you delete those, Remix automatically generates them. So if you don't have it in there, it's completely fine. I'm going to skip the next two files, that is the I18N and the I18 next file, next options file, because that is something that we are going to create right now. And then there is the root file, which allows you to set up the layout. You can say that you want to have it have consistent throughout your application. And then I have already installed and configured Tailwind for this particular project. So that's why I have a tailwind.css file. Now again, the contentful file over here just contains the space export that I have. I'm going to talk about it in a while, but we can move forward and ignore this for now. And then we have the public directory where we can show your public assets. I have configured a .env file which stores my environment variables. And then we have some configuration files, the packet.json file, the remix config file, and the tailwind config file. Now, I'm going to jump over into the index.js file. And right now over here, what I have done is I've just added some data which we are going to use later on. But this is what the code for the index.js file looks like. So to start the server, I will run the command npm run dev. This will start the local server. And when things are ready, we'll be able to see that on our web page over here. And this is over. And as you can see, we got simple text that says welcome to Remix. And these are links over here. But again, because I am using Tailwind and I have not applied the Tailwind styles, it simply looks like a text right now, but we're gonna go ahead and change these things in the next steps. All right. So what are the next steps? So the next steps is to see how we can change the title of the page. We will try to create two components, the navigation component and the card component, and then render recipes using the card component. So because I have time constraint over here, I'm going to try to be as quick as I can, as well as try to just reuse the code that I already have from my previous talks. So right now I am in the nav file. What I want to do is to import. I'm using the link component that Remix provides, and then we'll be exporting the component. And then just return this out. As I mentioned, I am going to use my existing styling, my existing code. Just let me bring it over here and close the nav. Now that I have the nav bar, and I want to use this on all my routes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my root directory and import it in here. I'm going to save this, come back to my project, and as we can see, we have a navbar on here. So navbar is created. We also need to update the title of the page. Now this is, we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's go ahead and create the card component. Right, I'm just trying to fetch the code for our card component. New file, card.jsx. And here is our card component. And as you can see in this component, I am passing the image, the title, a slug, and a description. And then I am rendering out that card over here. Right. Let's go ahead and save this. Now this card component I'm going to be using on my index route because over here is where I want to show all that data that I have. Now one thing I forgot to mention is uh, cooking has become one of my favorite hobbies and I like to try out new recipes. But the problem is it's difficult for me to manage these recipes. So I have created a website where I can store all these recipes and hopefully when it looks pretty, I'm going to share it later on with everyone as well. So this project is kind of in a way for me to start improving that and also localize it. So over here I have three recipes and I also have the same data in my contentful space. So as you can see, I have an ID, a title, a description, and a cover image for my recipe. Now all I have to do is render that information over here. So I'm going to remove all the code that we have. Let's just remove the UL from here. Now again, because we have a limited amount of time, I'm going to try to reuse as much code as possible and just make sure that we have everything in place. Instead of welcome to remix, I'm going to change this to welcome to remix recipes. And this is the heading that we see on the page. But what I really want to do is I want to change this. I want to change the title as well. So over here, the way you manage your meta tags and tags like the title tags in Remix is in the meta function. So over here, I can go ahead and change this and call it Remix recipes. I'm going to save this, come back to my application, and it's not pretty visible, but the title over here has changed to Remix recipes. And you can see that the heading has changed as well. Let's add a bit of styling to the h1 tag so that it looks much more pretty. And then again, I'm just going to copy my code for the recipes, paste it in here. I'm going to comment out the slug because we don't really have slug in here. And I'm going to remove the reference from the card as well. This is just to make sure that we don't run into any kind of error. But later on, we will be using this. And lastly, we want to import the card component. But if I haven't forgotten anything and if things look good, we should be able to see the recipes on the website. Let's save this, come back, and we have our recipes in here and we can see that they are rendered out correctly. All right, so we completed the first steps. We updated the title of the page. We created a navigation component. We created a card component and we rendered out the recipes using the card component. Now, moving forward, we just played a bit with Remix, but we haven't yet implemented internationalization. So, for the next couple of steps, that's what we are going to do. Now we need to add a couple of packages if we want to start with internationalization, and these packages help you with a lot of things. For example, it helps your application know which is the preferred language, and based on that, it passes on that information to your app, and then you can decide what kind of content you want to show. We And to do that, we need to create two different files. We'll do that. We are going to do that in the next step, and I already also have created the locale files, which is going to contain those strings that I will be using later on. So let's go ahead and set up the I18 next file first. Now, in this file, what I am doing is I am simply exporting an object, and in that, I am setting up the fallback language to English US, which means that if I don't have the content in a respective language, show the content in English US. And I'm because right now I'm just configured it for two languages. I have supported languages, and in here I am passing on two locales. The first is English US, and then there is uh, German Germany. Now, it's one thing would you sh- might want to know is that because you might want to know is that we often specify the region with the language, because uh, some languages have multiple dialects. For example, English is not spoken in the same way that it's spoken in the US and in the UK, right? There is a bit of difference. There is a bit of difference in how you write it as well. So if you are catering to that kind of audience who speaks different languages, and that language is also varies based on that region, you might want to go a bit granular and specify the region as well. Now we have set up the default namespace to common, and this namespace corresponds to the local files that I have created both for German as well as English. And this namespace file contains my translated string. And because I'm using Remix, I'm not gonna use React suspense, and so I have configured that to be false over here. Now that was the I18 next options file where we configured our internationalization options. Just for the folks who does not know what I18N stands for, it's uh, it's an abbreviation for internationalization. So 18 stands for the number of letters between I to N. So that's why it's I18N. All right. Moving forward, the next thing we want to do is set up the server.js file. So let's go ahead and do that over here. Now in here again, we are using importing couple of packages. We also are for this code it goes a step ahead, but it's doing is basically detecting the language. Once it knows the language, you can use that information later on in your code. It also checks for the supported languages that we have, the fallback languages, and again, all this information is already coming in from the I18 next options that we configured earlier. I'm gonna comment out cookies because we haven't implemented cookies yet, but we will look into how to do that in Remix. And again, in Remix, this is pretty straightforward, and it makes the developer experience really easy, really fun to work with. So we're gonna look into that as well. So we already had the packages installed. We created the I18 next options file and the i18.server.js file, and then we also already had created the locale files. The next is to update the uh, entry.client.js file and the server file and the root file. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Now in the entry.client.js file, again, I'm just continuously keeping a track of time to make sure that uh, I cover I get to cover everything in time. But I'll also try to walk through all the code that we have over here. So in here again, importing all the packages as well as the IIT Next options file that we created earlier. Now we are basically configuring it to use that and detect languages. So we say like we first of all initialize this, and then we are telling it to detect the way how we want to detect this. Now, the way most of the websites work is they pass on a lang attribute in the HTML tag, and we want to use that. So we want to say, hey, use that as a preference to detect that. And we don't have any cache in here, and that's why we have the cache array as empty. Once we have that, we are basically hydrating it, all the information on the client side. Let's go ahead and configure our entry.server.csx. Now, the code for this looks a bit similar to what we have on the client side. Let's close the files that we don't want to use right now. All right. Over here again, we are creating an instance. We are getting the locale. We are passing that information, and we'll be using this locale every time we make a call or we make a call to a route or we want to get any kind of information in here. So we have set this up as well. Now it says render the values from common.js file. Now what does this really mean is in my common.js files, I have a head title and the title. If I go to en us, it's again a head title and a title. If things haven't breaked, which haven't, what I want to do is localize this particular tag. So instead of welcome to remix recipes, if someone the who has the German localized version of this website, they should see Willkommen zu Remix recipes. Let's try to go ahead and implement that. Now, because again, we are using i18n library, it already gives us the useful, it already gives us all the functions that we would be needing to do that. So let's go ahead and go to index route. And I'm going to quickly just take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions or comments. Looks like everything is going pretty good. Perfect. Now in here, what I would like to do is already have the recipes. I'm just gonna let's just close this, and first thing we want to do is import uh, Vmix i18n from our server, and this is gonna be i8n.server, and we're gonna use this to get our locale information. Let's do this export an async function. We're gonna call it a loader, and in here we're gonna pass the request. Now, what a loader function really is. So in Remix, whenever a user tries to access a particular route, the loader function gets executed first, and in here you can you can basically run any kind of code that you want to execute before that page is rendered. Now what we want to do over here is get the locale. So I'm going to do const locale, and then let's do await. uh we're going to use i18 and next. All right, there might be something that I am missing over here. Remix i18, and yeah, this is what we want to use. And then we do get locale, and then we simply pass on the request. So based on the request, i18 and will get me the locale, and then I can render out that locale. So let's do written I don't know. For now, I just want to return the locale. So I'm going to do return JSON and do locale. So this gives me the locale. Now I can access this locale over here. So if I destructure this and use the use loader data hook and control this, let's come back to our page and check the console and we get English US. Let me zoom in a bit over here. We also get a couple of errors, but that's completely fine. We don't need to worry about it for about them right now. But you see, we get the locale ENUS, which means that I am using the ENUS or the English US locale over here. But we still haven't rendered out the values from the common GS files. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that we have the locale, we don't really need the locale in here, but I just wanted to show you how you can pass on data from the loader function to your component. So I'm gonna just remove this. I'm gonna also comment this out because we don't need this. What we want to do is use uh, the I18 and library, basically the use translation function or the use translation hook. Now we're gonna do if it's not ready, we're gonna return loading. But if the translation is ready, we want to return it over here. So we have the function t. Let's wrap this up. We have the function t, and in this function, we pass on the key. So the key over here would be title. If I save it over here, we would still see welcome to remixed recipes, which is what we expected. So seems like things are working well. Things are going as we planned them to be. So let's go ahead and update the navigation bar to add a language feature and implement cookies. So one thing I'm going to quickly do is come on to my IDN server, and over here we disabled this. So I'm going to enable it. But again, we don't have the cookie file. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and create that. So again, in my app directory, I'm going to create a file, which is cookie.js. And what this will do is it will basically store the information of the user's language preference in the cookie. So the next time when the user visits your website, we detect it via the cookie, and then we pass on that locale to the rest of our application. And this way, we have a consistent experience for the user throughout our application. So now that we have the cookie, we have implemented this. Let's go to our what was it? The nav component. So again, let's go to component navbar and in. All right, let's just quickly getting the code for that. Because the languages can change, you can have multiple languages. I want to create an array over here, but you can get this information from the I18 options that we configured over here and just render this out as well. But to keep it simple, I have taken this approach, but again, you don't really have to. And the next thing I want to do is import the use translation hook, because we will be using that hook in here. So let's just do const e ready I18 and say use translation. And if you see this I18N is what we are referencing over here. I'm going to save this, come back to the site. It says I18N cookie is not defined. All right, we got the I18N cookie in here. Let's quickly check. All right, I might have to restart the server, so let's quickly try to do that. Live coding is a tad bit fun. All right, let's come over here, refresh the page. Awesome. So we got things working. If I click on DE, things happened. Uh, Over here, the language changed to DEDE, but my content did not change, which is interesting. I'm just going to try to refresh this again and click on DE. It did not change again. There's something wrong. All right. We have this in here. I'm just going to quickly go through the code. Title, we have the cookie set in here. ENDE, all right. Right. That should have worked. I'm not sure what the error is. I'm just going to try to restart the server again. Uh, but in the meantime, what we want to do is we will also start moving on to the next step because we are running out of time. So the next step is to import the existing content model. Now, what is a content model? How do you import it? And what exactly is contentful? So I'm going to talk about all these things now. But before that, if you already are familiar with contentful and if you want to if you want to import an existing content model, you can simply run the command npx contentful CLI, give the space, use the import command, and then specify which particular file you want to import, and then also specify the space ID. I already have again done this for my works for my contentful space. So if I come over here to contentful, this is what my contentful space looks like. Now, Contentful is a composable content platform, which means that you using Contentful, you can manage your content, you can orchestrate content from multiple places, and we give you an API to render out this content however you like, wherever you like, right? Now, but to get started, you need to create an account with Contentful. You need to create a space, and once you have a space, you define a content model. Now, in this, I already have a content model which is called recipe, and this content model has a couple of fields: the title field, a description field, a cover image field, and the instructions. This looks good. I have the information in here, and if I go to content, we can see that I have a couple of entries in here. So if I click on one of those, you can see I have some content in here already in place. I can also change this content. I can, let's just say, we're going to call it tasty Hakka noodles. Uh, oops. And you can see that right now the status has uh, updated to changed, which means that your users would not instantly see those changes unless and until you publish them. So once I publish those changes, this is going to change to publish, and now my users would be able to see this updated content. All right. The next step we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new ingredient because I think that's what we want to do. Yes. So we have to create a new content model, and this should have a name and a quantity type. So let's go ahead and do that. So we will call this ingredient. And the first field that I want to create is a name field. Now this is going to be a text field, and so I'm selecting a text field. But based on what you want to, what kind of information you want to have in that particular field, you can select from rich text to location, that is coordinates, to JSON objects, Boolean fields, and you can have references as well. Right now, let's go to name, the text field, name, and I'm going to say this field represents the entry title, and I'm going to just say confirm. I have a name field. Now I'm going to create another field, and this one is going to be, what was it called again? Quantity type. Right, let's go ahead and configure this. But for this one, what I want to do is I want the user to only select specific values because uh, the ingredients can come in like packs, or if they are vegetables or fruits, it can be in kilograms or grams. I'm not sure like what folks in what other what's equivalent in the in the other system, but I use the metric system, so gonna stick with that. So I'm gonna say grams. I'm just gonna add one more, and this is gonna be a tablespoon. Why not? Right. Now, what is going to happen is that our user will only be able to select from these particular options that we have configured in here. I can also change the appearance. This can be a single line, a drop down. I will go with a drop down for this one, configure it, and now I have my ingredient content type. All right. I'm gonna quickly create a new ingredient. I'm gonna call it noodles, and it's gonna be a pack of noodles. I'm gonna publish this, and I'm gonna do one more. All right. Let's change this to ingredient. Now you can see the ingredient. Let's do one more real quick. I'm gonna do garlic. I'm gonna do grams. I'm gonna publish this. Now we have this over here. But right now we don't have a proper reference to both of this information. So what I'm gonna do is in my recipe, I'm gonna go and click on the reference field and call this ingredients. It can have many references because again we have like many references. Uh, I'm gonna do or let's do this. I'm gonna change the field type. I'm gonna have rich text. Call it ingredients. Configure. I want to reference it. Let's just go to validation over here. Accept only specific entry type, which is gonna be ingredients. That's it. I'm gonna confirm. Save. Now that is safe, I'm gonna come back to, let's just do any and go to, oops, let's go to Hakka noodles in here. And in ingredients, what I'm gonna do is one, and let's just do inline entry. It says garlic. I can do one. Again, I want to do inline entry. I will go and do noodles. All right. And I can publish the changes. And now I have this information in here as well. This does not look really pretty right now, but we will go ahead and make those changes real quick. So we have done this. Now we're going to look into the localization in Contentful. So now in Contentful, we have every space has its own set of locales, and you can define custom locales. Uh, you can also define locales via the web app or the management API. If you're using the management API, you will have to write a bunch of code to manage that. And we also, as I mentioned, support custom locales. So if you want to have your own locales in there, you can go ahead and create that. And you can basically implement localization in three different ways. The first is the field level localization, which means that localization can be added to each and every individual field, and this is built into Contentful itself. The next is the entry level localization, which means that you basically create a new entry for each locale that you have. And then we have content type level localization, which means you create a new copy of that content type for each locale. So for example, if I want to have a content type localization, what I'll do is I'll duplicate the recipe locale, make a couple of changes based on duplicate the recipe content type and make a couple of changes based on the locale that I want it to be of, and then use that and reference that locale later on. Now, based on how you are approaching localization, there are three important things that you need to take into consideration: is the governance, how or who has the ability to add content or manage the content for that particular localization. Then there is asynchronous publishing. Will you be able to publish the content even if the information is not present on one single locale? That is something else you need to consider. And then there is the option of fallback. If you don't have information of that particular content in another locale, can you fall back to another locale? So those are the three important things that you need to consider when you look into localization. Just a quick note on asynchronous publishing. We now have an application in our marketplace developed by one of our partners which manages asynchronous publishing. So if you want to go with field level localization, but if asynchronous publishing is something that is holding you back, go ahead and check that application, and I'm sure it's gonna help you with that. All right. So now we're gonna look into adding locale in Contentful. So again, I am in my Contentful space. I am gonna go to settings in here, and I will be going to locales. Now in here, I will click on add locale. Now I can select a locale. I'm just gonna go with German. I'm gonna do German DE, and I'm gonna select a fallback locale, which is gonna be EN US, and I can allow empty fields for this particular locale. I can save this. Now I have this locale for my space, but again, I haven't implemented it all the way. So what I have to do is in my content over here, my content type, I can go in there and now click on edit for the particular field and say enable localization for this particular field and click on confirm. And I'm going to save this. And now I basically have localization for that particular field. So you can, again, I'm over here doing field level localization. So I'm selecting which fields should be localized over here. And now the next step I want to do is show me the German version. This is the German version. Let's add the title, or let's just do multiple locales so that we can see all the locales at the same time. So we have the in English. I'm gonna just quickly do it in German. It's called Noodle. I think it's called Noodle. My German is still very rusty. I'm still learning German, but let's just assume it's called Noodle, right? So we now have our content in German as well. All right. So we added this. Now we want to fetch this data from Contentful. And for that, what we would want to do is create a contentful.server.js file and write a bunch of code in there which would handle the API calls for us. Now again, because we have like a restricted time right now, limited amount of time, what I will do is I'll try to get the code and just walk you through that. So in my code editor in the app directory, I'm going to create a new file under utils and call it contentful.server.js. And over here, I have my code. And in here, I've already configured my environment variables. I have my access token, I have my contentful space ID. I have a reusable function. And then I have a function which basically gets all the recipes, and based on the locale, it is going to fetch that information in that particular locale. I'm also getting a single recipe, and for that I am passing the locale as well as the ID of that particular recipe. All right, I see we are running a bit behind on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the repository that I already have in here, so that I get to show you the code. I get to walk you through the code and help you understand the next steps as well. So over here, this is what the code looks like, and we already have seen this particular file where we are making an API call to the contentful GraphQL API and getting the information. So we, assuming we completed this step, we are now rendering all the recipes coming in from contentful. We now want to implement dynamic routing, because what we had so far is this page, which did not really had any link. So if I would click on it, it would just render the index route itself. We didn't have any slug or any routing in there. Ideally, what we want to do is when we click on this particular link or this particular card, it should take us to the recipe page for this recipe. So the way we do dynamic routing. All right, this skipped a lot. All right, so the first thing we want to do for dynamic routing is create a function to fetch a single recipe, and then we create a dynamic route. So for Remix, the way to do dynamic routing is to basically append the name of that file with the dollar sign. Over here, I have dollar ID. So if I zoom in a bit more, you see I have $id.jsx, which will now take in all localhost slash whatever it is and pass it on to this particular file. And now I am over here getting that ID from the parameters. I'm also getting the locale. Again, this is coming in from the I18 library, right? It checks the locale, what kind of locale we have. And then we pass on that information to our single recipe function. And that function gives us the recipe out here. And then we are simply rendering out the information on our locale page. All right, so we looked into dynamic routing. We also looked into how to fetch single recipe. I'm going to touch a bit about rich text over here. So earlier over here we used rich text, and rich text basically allows your editors to add styling to your text. So if they want to bold something, add italics, underline, or have list, ordered list, unordered list, basically do any kind of styling or format the text they want. You use rich text for that. And if they're not also familiar with Markdown, you might want to use rich text. So we now rich text is basically the API sends out the rich text in a JSON format, and you use that JSON information to render that out. So we already have a library that's called rich text react renderer, and in here you pass on that JSON document, and we handle the rest of the styling for you. But if you want to get more creative, you want to add your own custom styling, you can do that as well. As you can see in here, I am managing how the list is getting rendered, how the UI list and the unordered list is getting rendered for my page over here. And then simply using the document to create components function to render out that information. All right. The next step we want to do is update the language switcher. And by this, what we mean is that we want to, right now we just have like two locales, which is English and German, but we might have more locales. So we want to update it to make sure that we are passing on the correct information. And if we have more languages, it does not look very clunky and we get a better UI for that. So this is what the final navigation component looks like. Again, uh, since this is a quick demo, I did not work a lot on the styling part of it, but you might want to look into how you want to style this. If you want to have a drop down list to show all those languages, and such. All right, so I'm going to do a quick recap over here. So internationalization is not same as localization. Localization is basically adapting your product, uh, not just based on the language, but also in the way how it looks, how your product feels to that particular target audience. And internationalization is a process to achieve that. Remix handles the view and controller part of the MVC framework. Using Remix, you cannot just create front end application, but you can have your own whole full stack application. You can manage, you can create APIs as well. And localization in Contentful can be achieved in three different ways. Now I know I had to walk quickly uh, throughout this stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the link, uh, and hopefully Sean can add it in the chat so that you all can get access to this, and also add it in the description wherever uh, this, you folks are watching this. All right. With this, the next steps over here is uh, right now we just saw a quick implementation of localization. Again, there is a lot that you can do to make your websites localized. One thing, being an expat living in a foreign country, I would like to, I would like to, I would like to recommend all is to make sure that your content is is available in at least two languages. One can be the local language that is spoken in that particular region, and one can be an international language that everyone speaks, so that you are able to reach out to more people and people are not missing out on that information. With this, I would like to thank you all for tuning in, for joining in, and thank you for CFE Day for having me.
Thank you so much, Harshil. This was really good. I know live coding is super hard and challenging, so great job. Yeah, I have so many questions. We're running low on time, so I'll ask just a few of them. And if those of you in the audience have any more, I'm kind of monitoring, so we can squeeze those in as well. All right, first, earlier on, right away when you started implementing internationalization, I noticed that you were you were doing it after the component was hydrated, correct? So I guess this maybe I should ask this so I get clarification. Was that the language switching and the content being fetched on the server side, or was the translated content actually being applied during the hydration process?
So it's because the translation or that particular content is fetched from the server side, and we don't want the user to just wait on that information. We do it after hydration. I don't know if that makes sense, because I'm losing words over here right now.
Yeah. So are you getting just the default locale from the server side and then switching it based on that cookie, or are you getting the actual context for the current locale on the server side?
Yeah. So it happens in, like, the library handles it in like two different ways. So it also checks it on the server side and the cookie. Earlier we did not implement cookie, so what it did was it was handling that on the server side, and this is what it's going to do when the user visits the website the first time, right? Because we don't really know what that information is. But once we have that information, then we use that cookie information and then handle the request.
Okay, that makes sense, and actually leads to another question I had, which was, so we saw that you used the I-18 Next library, and we could theoretically do all of this work ourselves without a library. So curious if you could recap for folks, what are the benefits to using a tool like I-18 Next? What do you get from doing that versus doing everything yourself?
Yeah. uh it just makes it easy and it handles a lot of things. The first thing is like detecting the language. What is the user's preferred language? Using the library, I did not have to implement it on my own. The library took care of that. I just have to implement that particular piece of code so that the library knows, okay, this is something that it should do. The next part is the translation part as well. I mean, not the actual translation, but getting that correct translation uh, from the locale file that I had. So now that the library has that information on what language the user needs, the library manages. The library basically handles and gets the correct information from my files or the correct translated content. The other thing it also does is, if I can bring that up over here, it has like hooks like use translation, and this basically gives you things like ready and functions over here, the translation functions. So if the information is still not fetched, you can use the ready flag over here and show something to the user so that the user isn't sitting ideally over there and they're like clueless what is happening. And then the translation function allows you to pass on the key and just get that information. So instead of hard coding it every time for every other page, you are basically reusing the code.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. And so you said there's a default storage mechanism in that library, but you also had implemented cookies manually here. And so I'm curious, is that why choose that path? Are there alternate choices that you can make for storing the current locale? Why is a cookie maybe one of the better options?
Yeah. Again, I think I might have spoken wrong. Like the library does not store that information, uh, and that's why we are using cookie to store that information. So the
Okay.
library,
Okay.
yeah, the library basically detects the information from the request that we make. So if the request has the header, or if the URL parameter has the lang attribute, or the HTML tag has the lang attribute, the library uses those information to detect the user's language preference.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so I've seen another way. Um, Sometimes folks will handle it by putting the locale actually in the URL so that you get
Mhm.
that content that way. Yeah. Have you found one approach to be better than the other? Storing just the current locale and having the same URL paths throughout your whole site, or actually generating different versions of pages?
That's something that I have been a bit conflicted about, because the default websites that I always that I access right now always show content in German. I don't speak German, but they have like the /de route which shows all this information, right?
Mhm.
If I remove that /de route and if I do /en or just simply remove it, assuming the default language is English, oftentimes the sites break. So it feels like it's not consistently applied. So I'm still not sure like what is the best approach. But one thing I would like to say is, if you take whatever approach you take, make sure that it's consistent throughout your application. I While I was working and learning about localization, I read that the lang parameter is very common, but people don't really want to use that because it does not look, for the user, it does not look very friendly, and that's why people go
Mm.
with the route parameter, which is fine. But in my experience, it's a bit hard to implement.
Yeah, because you have to make sure all the language, or basically all the content is translated. Otherwise, you could go to a /de path, and if you haven't made that translation, you might actually be getting content in
True.
English if that's your
Exactly.
default locale,
Yeah.
right? Okay, yeah, that all makes sense, and definitely trade-offs in both cases. All right, now before we wrap, last question. I was just curious to get your take on Remix. So we've heard more and more about this the last couple of years. Of course, in the React space, the Next.js is the one that most folks
Mhm.
go to, especially at scale. Um, and so, just curious, and I don't know the experience you have with Next, but maybe some of the things that you like a lot about Remix in comparison to some of the other frameworks that are out there today.
Yeah. Uh, the first, like, my personal website is built on Next, so I'm still use Next on for my personal website. I'm slowly transitioning into the Remix world. For me, the mental model that Remix provides is like pretty straightforward. I know what I am doing, where I am doing what. It makes it really easy when I am for me to map out what I am doing for my application. The other thing I would say is with Remix, I mentioned it earlier. It also has like this optim. I'm there is a proper word for that. I think it's called optimistic UI updates or something like that. So it handles a lot of things like a form submission. So whenever a user submits a form, Remix handles it on from updating the UI to making the API call, and if there is an error, making sure that the correct component or the correct thing is rendered to the user. So let's just say I submit a form, it checks, it makes a call. If it's an okay, it automatically handles that and shows that information to the user. If not, it just gives out the error based on how I've configured it. I mean, Next.js also has that flexibility. It also provides you that, but the way you implement that in Remix is far more simpler than the way you implement it Next.js.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I've heard a bit about that, and I know that Next has transitioned a bit to doing more work on the server, but that Remix definitely has that going for it. The little I've played with it seems very, very cool. If it's going to fit your particular scenario.
Mm.